White House revives free at-home COVID test program as COVID deaths rise. U.S. moves ahead to build American embassy on stolen Palestinian land. U.S. names new warship Fallujah, the site of civilian massacres in Iraq. Militia members who plotted to kidnap Michigan governor sentenced. Tossed cigarette butt leads to arrest of man who attacked Missouri Islamic Center. And Somalia says famine averted, but situation still critical. From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight: fears are rising about various illnesses going into the winter. 373 people died yesterday due to COVID-19, a 50% increase over a 14-day period. The Biden administration on Thursday resumed its program for mailing 4 free at-home COVID-19 tests to every U.S. household. You can order online at covidtest.gov or by phone at 1-800-232-0233. The test will start shipping next week. After distributing more than 600 million tests, the administration halted the program in early September due to Republicans in Congress obstructing funds. The Biden administration is moving ahead with plans to build a permanent U.S. embassy compound in Jerusalem, despite years of precedent against the move. The Intercept reports that it'll be built on land illegally taken away from Palestinians. Palestinian descendants, including several U.S. citizens, still have a claim to that land. The building of the embassy was announced by former President Donald Trump. He broke with decades of U.S. policy and international consensus by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the U.S. embassy there. Because the city's status remains disputed under international law, the U.S. embassy, like those of most other countries, was previously based in Tel Aviv. The U.S. Navy named their next-generation warship after a site made famous for civilian massacres by American soldiers in Iraq. Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro announced in a speech Wednesday in Washington, D.C. He said the new amphibious assault ship was named the USS Fallujah to honor the first and second battles in Fallujah. Operation Phantom Fury was an American-led offensive of the Iraq War that lasted roughly 6 weeks starting in November 2004. Iraqi NGOs and medical workers estimate between 4,000 and 6,000 people died as a result. Over 100 coalition forces were killed and more than 600 soldiers were injured. U.S. forces used depleted uranium in the battle. An article by a U.S. Army captain present at the battle published in the U.S. Army Field Artillery Manual claimed that wild phosphorus was also used. The Michigan Attorney General's office announced that Pete Musico, Joseph Morrison, and Paul Beller were sentenced Thursday for providing material support for a terrorist act. Musico and Beller must serve a minimum of 12 years and 7 years, respectively. The alleged commander of the group, Morrison, must serve a minimum of 11 years. In 2020, the trio plotted to kidnap Michigan Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Prosecutors said they're members of a militia group known as the Wolverine Watchmen. All were sentenced on charges of gang participation, support of a terrorist attack, and carrying or possessing a firearm during the commission of a felony. The defendants' ultimate goals were to kill police and elected officials and kidnap the governor of Michigan. A tossed cigarette butt led federal law enforcement to the man responsible for an attack on a Missouri Islamic center. Nicholas John Prophet broke into the Cape Girardeau Islamic Center in southeast Missouri through a glass window in April 2020. Before he drove 4 blocks to the center, video surveillance captured a man smoking a cigarette, then dropping the butt in a parking lot, according to federal authorities. Prophet lit 2 fires with the help of 2 gallon-sized containers that immediately spread through the inside of the building. Residents who lived on the center's 2nd floor called for help. This was minutes before the first scheduled prayer of Ramadan. A DNA analysis linked the cigarette butt to Prophet, authorities said, and street surveillance cameras in the area also recorded the man's vehicle. This is the 2nd time Nicholas Prophet attacked the Islamic Center in Cape Girardeau, and his 3rd attack against the house of worship, U.S. Attorney Sailor A. Fleming said in a news release. The Somali government has said that a famine was averted in October this year, thanks to joint efforts of the government, donor countries, and UN agencies. The country was experiencing its worst droughts in 40 years. But Abdirahman Abdishakur Warsame, the Somali presidential envoy, said that the drought still affects more than 7 million people in the country. It has already displaced more than 1 million Somalis. Over 150 countries on Thursday voted in favor of a resolution to confirm Palestinian sovereignty over its natural resources. 10 nations opposed the resolution. 8 abstained. Palestine welcomed the UN vote in favor of a resolution. Japan is considering taking in some Rohingya refugees. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Japan is considering taking in some Rohingya refugees in order to reduce the burden on Bangladesh. Ambassador Itu Naoki says Tokyo received a request from Dhaka and the UN Refugee Agency to settle Rohingya refugees in Japan. Bangladesh is currently hosting over 1 million refugees. They're living in claustrophobic camps in the southern border district of Cox's Bazar after fleeing their native Burma in 2017 after a military genocide of the Rohingya. The statement comes just days after 24 Rohingya refugees flew from Bangladesh to the US to formally settle in any third country. Pakistan has set a deadline for Afghans without legal documentation to leave the country by the end of this year. Afghan refugees in Pakistan with no resident permit or a United Nations High Commission for Refugees document will face serious consequences. This is the second time over the last few months that the government of Pakistan is warning foreign nationals and Afghan immigrants in particular. They're required to extend their stay visas and other legal documents, or else they'll have to pay fines to leave the country. Meanwhile, extending a stay visa has become extremely difficult for Afghan nationals within Pakistan. It takes months to get a visa extended, an Afghan migrant in Islamabad said. UNHCR Pakistan has also stopped issuing asylum seeker certificates and refugee cards since the Taliban's return to power. Pakistan's foreign minister has called India's prime minister the butcher of Gujarat. He said that in response to the Indian foreign minister who accused Pakistan of being the epicenter of terrorism. The heated exchange took place Thursday between Pakistan's Bilawal Bhutto Zardari and India's Subramanyam Jaishankar. It came after the UN Security Council adopted a statement warning of the increasing dangers of terrorism. Earlier, Jaishankar told the UN Security Council that India faced cross-border terrorism long before the world took serious note of it. When Bhutto Zardari was asked to respond to the allegation, he said, "I want to tell India that Osama bin Laden has been killed while the butcher of Gujarat is still alive, and he is the Prime Minister of India." India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat when in 2002 nearly 2,000 Muslims were massacred. Modi was accused of condoning the violence. Until his election as Prime Minister in 2014, he was denied entry into the United States. Far-right groups targeted French Moroccans in planned attacks in several French cities, including Paris. The violence took place after France's World Cup semi-final win over Morocco. A teenage boy was killed during the riot. More than 120 people were arrested on Wednesday night. Among them were 40 right-wing suspects who were trying to reach the capital's busiest spot that was packed with football fans, the report said. Moroccan fans faced verbal and physical attacks from some far-right groups as ruckus celebrations erupted across the country after France won the game 2-0. French lawmaker Thomas Portes condemned the planned attacks and racist violence against Moroccan fans. Meanwhile, at least 10 people, including 5 children aged 3 to 15, have been killed in a fire in a residential building near the French city of Lyon. The building was home to many Muslim families. It was not immediately clear how the fire had started. Lyon, the third largest French city, was the site of the post-football riot. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. justice for all.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at our in-depth analysis.
Thank you, Hena. 50 African countries were our guests in America. White House has a summit. 50 countries. That almost one-third of the whole world, if not more. What hopes do they have? Is America too late? Is it too late for America to get into Africa? Why America is worried about Chinese and Russians in Africa? What Africa is thinking? There are many questions around that summit, but in the United States, you pick up papers here and there, and you don't find much mention of such a major summit that 50 country leaders from Africa were here. We have with us Bill Fletcher Jr. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
I'm very pleased and honored to be with you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Bill Fletcher is former president of Trans-Africa Forum, and he's a senior scholar with the Institute for Policy Studies. So share with me, is America waking up about that? Is it too late?
Well, it's an interesting question. The United States has been present in Africa for a very long time through economic dealings, trade agreements, and certainly military operations. So Africa is not new to the United States, but one of the problems is that repeated U.S. administrations have treated Africa as a whole as a source for raw materials, a site for conflict, but not a place to develop. And so what's happening now, I think what we're seeing is that the U.S. ruling circles are very worried, particularly about China and about China's overtures to different African countries and the ramifications for that, since the Chinese approach to business deals and relationship to Africa is different than that of the United States.
So, Bill, do you think that you mentioned China, talking about American presence, you emphasize the point is the exploitation of natural resources. Is China any different?
No, not fundamentally. China is interested in the natural resources Africa has. Africa is probably the richest continent in the world when it comes to natural resources. If you look at a place like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, minerally rich, maybe richest country in Africa, and is a source for certain materials that are very hard to find in other places, such as those that are used in the construction of mobile phones. The Chinese are interested in those as well, but the Chinese have created greater opportunities for many African countries with different interest rates, creation of higher levels of infrastructure. But their involvement has been very problematic and has been very different than the way that China interacted with Africa during the years that Mao Zedong was the leader of China. The dealings now are much more capitalist relations. There is not exactly what you'd call acts of solidarity. The Chinese government is not particularly interested in the internal policies of African countries. And therefore, they're prepared to deal with whether it's tyrants or people who are democratic. And so as a result, there's been a greater opening for them. There's also a great deal of suspicion that exists with regard to the United States, because the United States has played, in general, a very destructive role in Africa, and has sponsored coups, assassinations, various other programs of neocolonialism. And so one of the things that's underway in Africa right now is a discussion about how to interact with these different capitalist powers that are interested in the natural resources of Africa and interested in business deals. And therein lies the question, can African countries come together and develop an independent and alternative direction where they're not being subjugated by outsiders?
Bill, you mentioned, can they come together and develop a unified strategy against the subjugation?
Mm-hmm.
But if we know from the history, different people will provide arms 3 centuries ago. So there is a fresh crop of slaves available to be transported. And
Right.
the colonial power continue to provide guns and ammunition and things like that. So divorce from the military intervention, do you think there is going to be possibility that people will come together? Because natural resources, you have the blood diamonds and this and that. Somebody is providing arms and somebody benefiting from these things.
Well, I remain an eternal optimist and someone who is a strong supporter of African unity, continental unity. And I want to emphasize that, not just sub-Saharan Africa, but continental unity. See, Africa, there was a fateful decision that was made in the early 1960s when the Organization of African Unity was formed. And there was a discussion about what should happen should the colonial boundaries be the boundaries for the new nation states of Africa. And there were leaders like Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana and others that said we needed to rethink Africa. There were more conservative regimes like in Morocco, Ethiopia, that wanted to keep the existing boundaries. That was a very fateful decision because the boundaries that had been created were not created by Africans. And the boundaries are the most bizarre that one can imagine, that cut across ethnic groups, all kinds of territories, and have laid the foundation for African disunity. So part of the resolution of African unity is going to have to be a continental-wide discussion. And I really mean continental-wide. The idea that Africa ends or begins at the Sahara Desert is completely wrong historically. The connections between Northern Africa and Southern Africa and Central Africa, et cetera, have gone back thousands of years. The future of Africa necessitates an engagement by the governments and social movements in the different parts of the continent that look at the question of Africa and say, what is our direction as a continent? How do we develop economies that are focused on African people as opposed to serving transnational corporations and other exploiters? Therein lies the rub.
Bill, in European, in Europe, people who fought for hundreds of years and gave the World War I, World War II, which were essentially European wars being fought all around the world. They started working with each other, came together, common interests, European Union came into being. Do you see that type of a path is something which African Union will take, or you're envisioning some other type of coming together?
I think that the coming together has to be within the framework of the African Union, which is the successor to the Organization for African Unity. But I think it has to come through stages that I don't see being implemented very well right now. And in particular, regional economic integration that has been discussed, but it needs to be much more thorough and needs to be on the basis of the development of regional economic plans. Now, one of the problems is that African economies have been influenced, directed by those who have advanced economic neoliberalism, what I like to call capitalist fundamentalism, that has driven the continent into debt, has led to a situation of the denationalization of industries, the privatization, et cetera, and this search for immense wealth. This has to be rethought, and an examination that really does look at what are the needs of the people in those different regions of the continent, and how do the economies of those regions need to be reshaped. And that means not following the dictates of Washington, Beijing, Brussels, Moscow, or any other outsider. It really means looking and developing a real plan for economic development. And that's going to necessitate also a real democratization of governments, because you want to engage regular people in that discussion. Now, this may sound utopian. The thing is, I don't see an alternative.
Bill, tell me, I mean, I was watching CNN, Fox, ABC News, NBC. Nowhere, mention of 50 African leaders being in Washington, D.C. It seems like a no event.
That's right.
Do you have any idea how African media has covered it?
Well, African media has covered this substantially. The problem is in the United States, see, it's not just a problem regarding how this summit is being viewed. In the United States, there is a prevalence of ignorance about international affairs and geography. And therefore, there is a downplaying of events. I mean, you look at a number of the major outlets, as you've mentioned, and they'll have news broadcasts that will put more attention on the disappearance of a white woman from some state in the Northwest over what's going on in Africa, attempts to resolve the Ethiopian civil war, the situation in Western Sahara, any number of other situations, or just the existence of this summit. There'll be more attention to snowstorms than there are to the fact and the implication of climate change and what it will mean to coastal regions, particularly in the global south. See, it's part of a much larger problem, and that's why we have to put major demands on the U.S. media to change its focus.
Well, thank you so much, Bill Fletcher Jr., for your time. Truly appreciate your thoughts.
It's a pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.